Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exited in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
Fantastic. This week we're going to talk about runway incursions and a few other little topics, but mostly runway incursions. And we kind of hinted at it last week, and this is a real deal for me specifically. We talked about my near miss a little bit last week. We did a whole show on it a long, long time ago, but I am a believer that maybe I should have died in a plane crash when a helicopter landed right in front of me, less than 100 feet, while I was on the go, mid runway, wheels rotating off the ground. And, you know, I was maybe a 40-hour instrument student at the time, and meaning I had 40 hours more than I had when I had a private certificate given to me. But I don't know that I really thought a lot about runway incursions when I was a new pilot. I thought a little bit about hot spots, thought a little bit about trouble areas, but I don't know that runway incursions came up for me much when I was learning how to fly early on in my pilot career. And I think it's something that this airport gives us a few unique opportunities to talk about them. Quick poll question for you, Wally. How many golf carts do you think have their home here at David Wayne Hooks Airport?
I'm guessing there's probably 50 to 60 golf carts.
So if you think about how many aircraft are in T-hangars, that means there's probably a golf cart for every 3 airplanes on this airfield.
Yeah.
And they could all be active at the same time, meaning aircraft and golf carts.
Yep.
Using the same taxiways, the same driveways, the same non-movement area and movement areas that we all move in both of those. So it's a very real deal around here, the amount of car traffic, the amount of foot traffic. That when I come to work in the morning, Mike is a taxiway that if you didn't fly here regularly, you would think it was a taxiway because it is, but you wouldn't know it was part of a quote-unquote non-movement area, which means the tower and ground control don't control the ins and outs of that flow. On one side of that is a active water runway, and on the other side of it is private homes and hangars with $15 million jets parked in them, right? So very unique environment. But on that Mike taxiway, when I come in the morning, I would bet there's on average 4 people exercising every day I come in.
Yeah. 2
joggers, a walker, and a cyclist.
Right.
On an active taxiway with $15 million jet traffic on them. Very regularly, you can see people holding, almost playing chicken, you know?
Yeah.
There's a truck and a jet. And who's going to move? The truck's going to move ultimately. But there is a lot of stuff going on here, which creates more runway incursions than almost anywhere in the United States. And the tower and team have worked really hard. We have an annual RSAT meeting, which is runway safety something meeting. All the flight schools get involved. All the people on the airport are involved. We do a monthly conversation with the tower to try and eliminate problem areas and things. But we're not going to make them completely go away because we're human and we're all going to make mistakes. Let's define runway incursion first and foremost. A runway incursion is any occurrence at an aerodrome involving the incorrect presence of an aircraft, vehicle, or person on the protected area of a surface designated for the landing and takeoff of aircraft. So we've talked a lot about taxiways, but what does a runway look an awful lot like?
It looks a lot like a taxiway.
Like a taxiway.
Yeah.
So what's really funny is at this airport, all the gates for cars to get in it there's a gate required to get in, but there's a lot of places you can cut through. We had a snow. You remember the snow about 2 years ago? We had big snow. I came up here to check the building and all that. I mean, the city was shut down for the most part. Came up here to check the building after we had the first inch of snow, and people up north are laughing as I say that out loud. And so I come up here, and there are tire tracks leading from my parking area through the grassy knoll here, going out to the parking lot, and then a commencement of 400 circles out there on my tarmac.
Oh, gosh.
So someone cut through with this kind of a controlled area and got on my tarmac and did circles in my parking lot out there. So you can get a car on the field, is my point, if you want to bad enough. You can tailgate at any gate if you wanted to bad enough.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little funny story. This happened a long time ago. Back in my general aviation days, I was flying for a company that flew freight. We flew canceled checks at night, and that's a whole industry that doesn't exist anymore. But basically, I used to fly from Monroe, Louisiana to Dallas, Texas, and turn around and go back to Monroe. And I'd take off from Monroe at 12:30, midnight 30, get to Dallas about 2, and turn around and go back. Well, we had an airplane that needed some avionics work, and one of the avionics shops that we used was over in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at Addison Airport. So the plan was that I was going to go over and fly over to Dallas Love in a Beechcraft Baron, drop my checks off, then fly the airplane over to Addison, park it in front of the avionics shop, call a cab, go to the hotel, and when they were done with the airplane, they were going to call me. I was going to come out and fly it home. Anyway, so I landed at Addison Airport, and again, so it's 3 in the morning. It is a controlled airport, but the tower was closed, so I didn't really have any guidance as to where the avionics shop was. I just knew the general area. So I'm taxiing this Baron around, looking for the avionics shop, having a difficult time finding it. All of a sudden, I realized that the taxiway that I was on had a stop sign. And that's when I realized I wasn't on a taxiway anymore. I was on a street. I was taxiing this airplane down a street.
Very important question. Did you stop?
I did stop. I did stop. Well, what happened is I had to turn the airplane around, but it was a narrow street, so I had to get out, shut the airplane down, and push it. A Baron, a max takeoff weight on a Baron is 5,400 pounds, so it's heavy. So I'm pushing this thing, pushing on the rudder to move the nose wheel, which on the rudder where it says "Do not push." I finally get the airplane turned around after going back and forth. Finally found the avionics shop, and the next day when we got back out there, I realized I was taxiing down roads. So there are airports that I would like to think nowadays with security, it's not like it was back then. But you can probably get cars onto airports where they shouldn't be.
Yeah, hopefully Addison. Well, I know Addison's a much bigger, busier airport nowadays. They probably solved for that problem for sure. But I think the bigger problem isn't necessarily the aircraft as much as it is the other traffic, cars, people. Deer here is a problem, even though we got some real high fences around this place. My chief pilot came in the other day and said, I'm pretty sure we killed a turtle, and it was a pretty big turtle, and that was on the runway. So that might have gone unknown to the tower, but we have wildlife on that runway all the time. I've come in to land here before, and the tower said, use caution, 3 young men at the end of the runway. And there had been some boys that had jumped the fence from the subdivision over there, and they were out there playing on the runway. And I happened to live in the same subdivision and was on the phone with my son when I got out of the airplane and said, you better not be anywhere near this airport right now. He wasn't, thank goodness. But the reality is there's a lot of traffic at most GA airports that we have to avoid to make sure they don't happen. The big one, obviously, my near miss and, others like that can cause real harm and damage. Us as pilots, we got to be on our A game. We all have heard and know where do most near misses and collisions happen? Near airports, because there's more traffic at those airports. So head on a swivel, being cautious of things. The FAA's done a good job through a number of mechanisms and partners like Air Safety and others that have done a number of things to help with training us pilots and making us better. The FAA has a good series now called From the Flight Deck, and we'll work on putting this in the show notes for the show when it's published, so you can see it. From the Flight Deck now, they have a map of all the airports that they've done this video series from, and what you can expect. So I'm looking at their map right now. There's 40 green dots, which means they've made videos. Videos coming is another 40 dots at airports in the country. They just so happen to have done one here at this airport, talking about the challenges of really, oh man, this has got to be a small, big airport. Wally, you travel to a lot of big airports, but a huge FBO that we just talked about, opposite field, big primary FBO on the other side of the field.
Yeah.
Three big fly schools, lots of independents, lots of jet traffic, personal jets, private jets, helicopters. We got we don't have any. We got water planes, so seaplanes coming in and out of the sea runway.
Air ambulance, helicopter
ambulance, helicopter operations. Lots of military in and out of here on a regular basis. Lots of helicopters. Helicopter services right behind me. They're working on and moving helicopters all the time. So lots going on. This FAA runway safety series called From the Flight Deck. Really, it's all about hazards and hotspots to try and eliminate some of the bad that happens on the runways. Is a really good video series. The video from Dave Way Hooks is about 18 minutes. It's required watching for any new CFIs that come here. And it should be, if there's a video about your home airport, you should be sharing it with as many people as possible, because it actually shows a little bit about the triangle and the unique things that are just really obscured from what most pilots might be expecting. So we'll put that in the show notes, and hopefully that'll help you if you're ever at this airport. And then there is a runway simulator that we've talked about in the past as well that gives you kind of taxi instructions. It's some complex stuff. Taxi on Juliet Echo Papa, hold short, 17 right. You get there, you cross, then they tell you to cross, and you cross, and you're kind of using a pointer to give it the next instruction that you would do. And they're trying to trick you up in that simulator, or maybe they're just trying to give you some complex instructions to make you a better pilot. But it's a really good tool as well, because if you haven't seen them, there's air disaster videos on the TV, the Discovery Channel, of where, a GA aircraft taxis across in front of a jet that's taking off, and a lot of people get hurt and get killed. It is something that I don't want to participate in, hopefully ever again, for sure.
Yeah.
What about non-towered airports? I mean, there's a NASA report you could file. I don't think there's going to be a tower that's going to talk about a runway incursion, but isn't it more dangerous at a non-towered airport, in your opinion? The amount of runway activity that could be considered incursions?
Yeah, I would think so. Especially obviously a busier non-towered airport. At a non-towered airport, I mean, there's not a. We hear people talk about active runway. Well, at a non-towered airport, there's really no active runway. I mean, you can do whatever you want at a non-towered airport. We have one airport southwest of Houston that is used by a lot of agricultural operators, a lot of crop dusters flying in and out of there. And the direction of the wind really doesn't mean a whole lot to them. If they're coming from the north, they're going to land south. If they're taking off to the north, they're taking off north.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the winds are. So I've had a lot of situations there where you're in the pattern trying to do some landings The wind may be 020 at 8 knots, so you're landing the north runway. And they're coming in, and they're not talking to anybody. So you better be careful.
Yeah. Well, and I've been at an airport north of town here that has changed names a number of times, and we were calling out the old name. They were calling out the new name. They were coming in from the east. We were coming in from the west. And, you get to about 400 feet and see a landing light on at the other end of the runway, eye level with you. That's going to change your approach technique.
Yeah.
You're going to divert. You're going to really quickly remember which way you're supposed to go with oncoming traffic. And thank goodness we weren't on the runway, but I could see where that would be a real problem. Or could be a real problem for sure.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on runway incursions, Wally? It's definitely something we've seen here a lot. There's probably been more than a dozen of those at this airport this year. I think you can see some of that information online. That if I can find that stuff, I'll definitely put some of that on our show notes as well. But anything to talk about from a GA perspective? Forget the big world that we don't all live in regularly.
Yeah, I just think it's important that that you keep your guard up until the airplane is completely shut down and all the switches are shut off, and you can say that parking checklist is complete. I see a lot of people land, we taxi clear the runway, and they go, okay, it's over with. It's kind of like the Atlanta Falcons did in the Super Bowl a few years ago. I think at halftime they kind of said, okay, yeah, we got this. But
Mr. Brady didn't say he was
Mr.
done.
Brady had something to say about that. So, keep your game on, keep your game face going until you get in and parked and the airplane is completely shut down. And I say completely shut down. I mean, how easy is it to come in and maybe leave the mag on, maybe leave the master switch on, because maybe you have some electronic display that you need to get the Hobbs time from, and you pull the mixture and you just leave all that stuff going, and then some ramp guy comes out to move the airplane, and maybe
something bad happens.
Moves the prop, and that airplane could try to start.
Yeah, be safe out there. Don't let that happen, runway incursion or not. Don't let that happen and get yourself hurt. As we continue the conversation and migrate a little bit away from runway incursions, let's talk a little bit about approach light systems that are at the end of each runway, or most runways, and give a little bit of guidance to the listener on, again, a topic that I think I knew about or was aware of, and I knew we had these lights, but I didn't necessarily know all how they worked and maybe how many different types there were out there. We're going to talk about two systems today. We're going to talk a little bit about PAPI and a little bit about VASI. And I guess, for starters, I didn't even know what those things stood for back in the day. And I don't know that it's really important, but let's talk about lights at the end of the runway for approach systems, Wally.
Okay.
What do you mostly see at your big airports when you come in to land? Chicago O'Hare, do they have a PAPI or a VASI or both?
It's going to be a PAPI. And PAPI stands for, it's PAPI, Precision Approach Path Indicator. VASI is VASI. That's a Visual Approach Slope Indicator.
So really and truly, there's a combination of red and white lights that help the individual pilot understand whether they're on the glide slope, right?
Right.
And there's an assumption that in a PAPI, I know, 2 white, 2 red, you're on the glide slope and you're right where you want to be. At this airport, there's some big power lines at the north end of the runway that you go over before you cross the final road and the threshold. I think I've always wanted it to be, I think visually for me, I feel a little bit more comfortable when it's 3 white and 1 red.
Right.
What's your opinion on that, Wally? Should I be using that little technique, or is that dangerous for me to be off glide slope like that?
Well, if you're gonna err towards one side, I think maybe being high would be better than being low. I don't see it as being a major problem. I mean, maybe your touchdown point is not 1,000 feet down the runway. Maybe it's a little bit farther. But I mean, we know the type of airplanes we're flying. We've got more than ample runway. I'm not advocating not landing in the touchdown zone. We should be landing in the touchdown zone. But if you're gonna cheat a little bit, I would say to cheat toward the high side.
Yeah, and I know it's not necessarily maybe a best practice, but I think everything you said is why I do that and why I kind of lean towards that. The other piece of that is I recently heard someone talking about a technique of using 4 white to be really high. What's so dangerous about 4 white that we would not want to ever do that for?
Well, with 4 white, you're not even in the zone if that makes sense. I mean, it's
you don't know what zone you're in anymore for sure. You could be 300 feet high. You don't know you're maybe just a little high.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying on a electronic glide slope indicator, the glide slope in the airplane. I mean, well, why not just make that needle peg out to the bottom and be on the high side of the glide slope the whole time? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And once you do that, you have no clue where you are. As long as you're within the range of the instrument, whether it be these visual lights or an electronic instrument, you're within a certain predetermined range, if you will.
Yes. And the real difference visually from a VASI and a PAPI is a PAPI's kind of a straight line across.
Correct.
And a VASI's kind of stacked lights.
Yes.
For no better visual. It's hard to show a visual on a podcast, everybody.
Yeah, and the sayings for the VASI we had is red over white, you're flying just right. White over white, you'll fly all night. And red over red, you'll soon be dead.
There you go. So don't be red over red.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So what was the first one? What was the correct one? White over red?
No, red over white.
Red over white. Red over
white. White over red, you're upside down. So red over white, you're flying just right.
All right. There you go. So make sure if you're on a VASI, it's red over white. And in a PAPI, again, it really should be two white, 2 red, so you're on the glide slope. If you had 3 red, I would definitely climb. And 4 white or 4 red, you're probably not going to be in a good spot for very long, for sure, on that approach. And then there's millions of other lights we could talk about, whole nother scenario, a whole nother podcast episode. We just wanted to touch on approach light systems a little bit because we had a couple questions come up recently, and we wanted to cover that. And one more topic that we wanted to talk about today, we've hinted at it a number of times, but we want to talk about doing it yourself fueling. With fuel prices being absolutely bonkers right now, you probably, if you fly cross country at all, you're probably shopping for fuel prior to picking your destination. Would you say that's a commonality nowadays, Wally?
Yeah, definitely.
So at this airport right now, and I know there's others out there that are going to tell me theirs is much, much worse. At this airport right now, today, self-serve fuel is $6.94 a gallon for low lead 100. And that is about, it's almost 80% higher than it was a year ago today. Yeah. So crazy, crazy high prices. If you were going to do, if you're a student or a CFI and with a student, you guys wanted to go get a cross country knocked out today, I probably wouldn't go to one of the airports that we commonly go to because they're towered and their fuel's going to be ridiculous as well. I think I would try nowadays to pick an airport that had cheaper fuel. That means what? They're probably not going to have the services that I'm used to them having.
Yeah.
A fuel truck's not going to pump the fuel for me, and I'm going to get a little bit better deal on fuel because of that. So, said this many times, but the first time I fueled an aircraft was 3 years after I started flying, and I probably had 400 hours of flight time. It was way past due that I had to do it, and when I did it, I was as rookie as a rookie could be. I was in, what was the name of that little airport? I'll think of it. But I'm on an airport on the north side of a big lake in Austin, Texas. Took some friends up there and dropped them off. And because we had people and luggage, I had taken some fuel out of the aircraft before we left, and I wanted to make sure I took care of the airport that I landed at that didn't have any fees. So I wanted to put some fuel in the airplane before doing a long cross-country home. And this was about a 200-mile flight. So I pull up, drop them off, park the plane, find the fuel pumps, taxi over to the fuel pumps, and I look like a deer in headlights. I'd never done it before. I knew that the guys that pump fuel here, they clip something to the airplane, so I'm looking for something to clip to my airplane. But other than that, I didn't know really what to do. And I'm sitting there thinking, to stand on this step that I use to check the fuel in the tank is going to be very difficult, right? So lucky me, there was a very nice woman at that airport that was out there working, and she asked me very calmly if I'd like to borrow a ladder. And guess what? She walked around the corner, and there's a ladder, that was there for fueling aircraft, by the way.
Yeah.
And I pulled that ladder out, and then I clipped the ground wire, which is that little thingy that you clip to the airplane. You're trying to get any static electricity off that airplane, which, if you didn't know it, airplanes are very full of static electricity. That's why we have static wicks on the end of control surfaces to remove and displace that static. So I touched the airplane. I knew I grounded the airplane. I know how to use a credit card. If there's one thing I'm good at, I can use a credit card. So I put my credit card in, and then I pulled the fuel line all the way over there and made sure I wasn't, binding the fuel at all. And I think the key is don't lose a fuel cap. Don't let the fuel cap get away from you, because that would make for a very non-eventful flight home. And fill it up the way, it's a visual kind of effort. You've ever filled up a gas can for a lawnmower, you know what I'm talking about. You're kind of looking in the hole of the gas can to see when it gets close. I don't think you're going to hurt anything if you overflow the tank a little bit, but it's not, I don't think, to fill it all the way to the rim nowadays in this weather, we have 103-degree temperatures. It's going to expand a little bit in that tank, and it's going to push some of it out the fuel vent. So I would get it really close to the top if I needed full tanks, and then I would put the caps on and head my way to wherever I was going to go. If I was unsure at all, if you haven't seen them, there are dipsticks. I carry a dipstick for my aircraft everywhere I go in a plane, and that gives me the ability to check the levels that I have. And that dipstick is very specifically made for my one aircraft, and it has the gallons per tank. So you can have a 182 that has 43.5 gallon tanks, and you can have a 182 that has bigger tanks than that. Probably have a 182 with smaller tanks than that. But you want to make sure you're using the right dipstick. If you do have a dipstick, I've seen someone take fuel out of our 182 with the wrong dipstick. And if I wouldn't have checked the fuel, that they were doing it for me, if I wouldn't have rechecked that, I wouldn't have known that I had a lot less fuel than I asked for them to put in it, right? So that could have been a scary situation. So even if you fuel it, if you have plans and you're tight on fuel at all, make sure you check it with that dipstick. It's pretty much like the straw that you put in a cup and hold your thumb over it.
Yeah.
Look at it and see how much fuel you have. The other thing I think is important, if you'd probably do it if someone else fuels your planes for you, but that is sumping your tanks.
Yeah.
You definitely want to sump your tanks. And you say, why would I want to do that? Well, you're not so sure that remote fuel tank didn't have a crack in it and get a lot of land water in it, meaning water from a well or rainwater or anything else. There might be pardon the French, but a pissed off airport employee who came back and put a bunch of water in that tank instead of fuel. So make sure you sump those tanks, and that means you need to probably have a sump in your flight bag and be ready to use that sump when you fill your plane full of gas to make sure there's not water or dirt or contaminants in that fuel so that you can be safe when you fly home.
And I will say this to flight instructors. I think it's a very good drill to when you are out there pre-flighting with your student at some point in their career as a student pilot. fill that little sump up with a little bit of fuel, and at some point somebody's going to have a bottle of water with them. Just pour some water in there and just look at what it looks like, or better yet, take that fuel and pour it in the water bottle and see how quickly it separates. Shake it up. That fuel and that water will separate within seconds.
For sure, no doubt. And if you want to, you can follow United Flight Systems on social media and check out our pictures. We show that picture fairly regularly just to remind students and people what it looks like and what you should not see when you sump your tanks.
Yeah, and get rid of it. Probably don't want to leave that laying around because it does almost look like some blue Gatorade.
Yes. I have heard of someone picking that up and drinking it, but not me and not this flight school. So,
yes.
That will wake you up for sure. So, really 3 topics today, but primarily runway incursions. We talked about approach lighting systems, and then we kind of gave you a little bit of an overview on do-it-yourself aircraft fueling. All short topics today. Hopefully a potpourri of things that will make you a better, safer, more conscious pilot. As always, fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.